Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So, as you can see, we've got the full cast and crew tonight. So, over that direction, Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone. Doing good.
Excellent. We're going to go anti-clockwise and passing me because, everybody knows who I am. I'm on the internet. We have Tracy Baggiano. How you doing, Tracy?
Doing good. How's everyone else? Not that they can answer.
All right, and we're going to return back to clockwise and go past go, collect $200. Mike Christensen, how you doing, Mike?
Hi, how are you? Well, thanks.
I mean, for a man who just collected $200, you don't seem that impressed. I understand. Thanks to inflation, that's now worth about 45 cents.
That was insert inflation joke. Yeah, I was going to say, I owe somebody more than that.
I'll take it. It'll get me at least 2 trips to see a foster kid that's in Charlotte. So.
There you go. That's
I did fill up my wife's car with gas, and it was like $50, and I couldn't believe it because I have an electric car. So
where'd you do that at? I need this tip.
Went to the parking lot, got a rubber hose and a breath mint. The rubber hose was $50. The breath mint was only $1.
Me over $75 to visit one kid.
Are you driving a tank?
A Subaru? No, it's all the way to Charlotte and back.
Are you selling a tank? I know interested parties.
There's a tank museum in Danville.
There is, yeah. I've not been to that one, but there's a couple. Actually, there's a big tank place out of Las Vegas that looks really exciting. But that's not what we're here for tonight. We're here for Shop Talk. We're talking talk. Idea of Shop Talk, if this is your first time here, a little bit of back and forth, little conversation, and just a little water cooler chat for a Monday now that we're all back at work. Mostly in the technical area, the data platform space. If you do have questions, this is definitely a chat-driven show, so get them into chat and we will talk about them. But we do have a couple of topics tonight. So our main topic of the evening, SQL Server 2022 Community Tech Preview 2.1 has been released. And there's a couple of good links. If you have not tried out the Community Tech Previews yet, it's pretty easy to do. You can pull this together with Docker containers and very easily grab and try it out in Linux. There's some of the stuff that will be tougher to do with Docker, like if you want to try out anything with, say, Polybase or working with integration services or some of the other products that technically do work. You can get them to work, but they require a bit more effort. But 2 links dropped in chat there. First one is the official announcement. That's the full set. The second, the LinkedIn article, comes from Bob Ward, who hits some of the highlights, especially for database developers. So, as is the nature of things, the first topic that Bob brought up was Polybase, because that is, after all, one of the most important features of SQL Server. Notice how I kept a straight face the entire time. And everybody else is totally confused. Like this, I understand.
I didn't keep a straight face.
Yeah. All right. Look,
Do they deprecate things that you write books about? Is that like their MO?
They actually did, yes. Java. So the Java connector for Polybase has been deprecated, which means that connections to HDFS, the Hadoop distributed file system, and to Azure Blob Storage no longer allowed. But there's a new API-based connector. So as that comes out, I know it's been announced. I don't remember if it's in the CTPs yet. I know that they've got S3 as a provider. They've got the Delta table format as a provider, because Bob's post talks about those. But I would assume that you'd have other services like Blob Storage or Data Lake Storage. You can do that in Azure Synapse Analytics with Polybase. So I'm figuring that at some point, if it's not there already, which tells you I haven't actually tried 2022 with Polybase yet. It's on my to-do list, but there is create external table as select, CETAS. Create external table as select is something that was added to Azure Synapse Analytics to the dedicated SQL pool and also the serverless SQL pool based off of create table as select. The whole idea is here's a select statement. I want a table that is based off of that select statement. I want you to figure out what the data types are. I want you to figure out what the nullability and non-nullability is. I have a select statement. Please do not make me write out the entire structure of the select statement. This is really good for things like temp tables, for transitional data, for staging tables, where I just want to create the thing. I don't want to have to write it all out first. Not so good for, say, I'm working with a regular table in a transactional processing system where I should know about keys. I should know about data types and data lengths and all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. Should is carrying a lot of weight there, but it does help a lot for warehousing scenarios, for staging systems and the like. So I am legitimately excited. Create external table as select also says it writes data out. And this is the other, the part that's the real kicker, because CE-TAS in the Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool is really the only way that you can insert data into a data lake via serverless SQL pool. It is going to create a table using Polybase, an external table. Well, it needs to store that data someplace because external tables don't store the data in your database. They're going to store them in somewhere external. And this will allow you to write it out to S3, write it out to a data lake, be able to say, here is a long query that I've got the results here. I just want to write them out to a Parquet file and have something else work with that Parquet file. So it's pretty useful in certain circumstances. Again, this is not something you'll probably do in a transactional system very often, but you could use it as part of a data lake population process. It's your ELT for loading your data lake and getting that transactional data into a place where business intelligence people, where data scientists can take it and run with it and do horrible things to it, torture the data until it confesses. So that is pretty exciting, I think. Query store is enabled by default. So Tracy's book, people are still going to buy. I mean, I'm only mildly jealous.
Of course. Query store is the bomb. It'll be it's going to be on by default.
So what is automatic digest storage for SQL Ledger, Kevin?
SQL Ledger is a thing I have strong opinions on, and they're not positive opinions.
That's their attempt at blockchain, right?
That is correct. So we did have Karen Lopez present for the user group, and she did a really good job on explaining blockchain, on explaining the concept of ledger tables. It's something for the most part, I don't think belongs in SQL Server. To the extent that it does belong, it's not blockchain in the distributed system sense, but instead more of the generating hashes and storing it with the data and having tamper-evident storage. So in those cases, that's where ledger tables can be useful. So, I mean, the whole idea of the ledger table is I want to ensure that nobody has modified my data after it was written. I want to make sure that nobody can fraudulently update database records and change transactions and have us not be able to see it. So conceptually, it's a pretty fair concept. I think it's going to be in very rare use. But as far as automatic digest storage, I don't know. If I look at the other document right here, yeah, actually it doesn't even say what automatic digest storage means. But, oh well. Maybe somebody else does know. I don't know. However, I do know about the next item that was on Bob's post, and that is approximate percentile discrete and continuous. This is a thing that I got a chance to try out during early preview, and it is markedly faster than percentile disk and percentile cont. If you're not familiar with those, they are window functions that perform statistical operations. They give you the percentiles either as a discrete value or a continuous value. The main difference between them is with percentile cont, the continuous version, you are able to get a data point that is in between two values because that's how percentiles work. With discrete, it will always guarantee that you get the closest actual data point to the percentile that you selected. So if you say, give me the 95th percentile value from this table, it will give you the 95th percentile if there is an exact match. If there's not exactly a number that can be cleanly divided so you have a 95th percentile, it will find the nearest one for discrete. So anyhow, that window function works, but is incredibly slow once you get past tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of records. Once you get into hundreds of thousands and millions of records, percentiles in SQL are terrible. Approximate percentile is like approximate count distinct. It uses a function, approximate count distinct uses a concept called hyperlog-log. So there's a paper on this, public information about what hyperlog-log does. It basically gets you the number of distinct values in a set up to about a 2.5 to 3% error rate. So if there were really 100 values, it's going to give you a number somewhere between about 97 to 103, which for most cases, if you have an enormous data set and you've got millions of distinct values, the fact that if you have like 8 million versus 8 million and 50 generally doesn't make a big difference. This is the type of thing where you run that calculation to get a rough idea, not to get precise numbers. If you need precise numbers, then you do count distinct. You take the performance cost. But if you just need close enough, rough estimate, within a couple percentage points, approximate count distinct came out a couple years back. Approximate percentile, discrete and continuous, is coming out now, and it is markedly faster, like order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude faster than the original, especially once you get to large data sets. If you're talking millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of records, I had a chance to test that out, and it went from query doesn't finish to query takes seconds, 20, 30 seconds. It's way fast. Very pleased to see that make its way into the product. And it is also close. I didn't do really thorough testing. I did moderate testing, and things were close enough. Like, okay, yeah, the exact value might be 49.8, but you got 51. Again, if I need the exact numbers, I'm going to have to use a different process. But most of the time, what I'm looking for is what's the 95th percentile of response time. And if my 95th percentile of response time is 55 milliseconds in real life, if it tells me 50 to 60, somewhere in that range, I'm okay. 50 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds, unless that's in the terms of my SLA, that's not a big enough difference for me to care. If it takes a query that would take, just shy of forever and turns it into 10 seconds. So very pleased about that. And then Mala dropped in a link to an Itzik Ben-Gan article about additional T-SQL improvements. And I think Itzik does cover some of these, like distinct. Yeah, is distinct from and is not distinct from.
Yes.
So we were talking about this a little bit before the show, and the idea is that in a lot of cases, we write code like where value equals at var, or value is null and at var is null, or where you're joining. Let's say, again, going back to a warehouse scenario, I want to see if any of these records changed. And so any column that's nullable, I need to see if A is equal to new A, or A was null and new A is null. Because if they were both null, then they're the same. Let's not get too far into the semantics of null, and technically null is not null. Null does not equal null, but let's ignore the semantics of that for a moment. Is distinct from, or is not distinct from, is a way of encapsulating both of those queries. Check if left-hand value equals right-hand value, or check if left-hand value is null and right-hand value is null. And if one of those two matches up, then you'll get your result for is distinct from. So if left-hand side is not equal, like if this is A, this is B, then is distinct from, true, this is distinct from. If this is A, is not distinct from. So if you ask it, is left-hand side distinct from right-hand side, the answer will be false. Hopefully that was sufficiently muddy. Otherwise, I'll add in some ternary logic. We'll talk about that for a bit. But
I like the date part too, Kevin.
yeah, date trunk. Date trunk is a function that made its way in Postgres. It is very useful, and Itzik talks about that. I think Itzik at least links to it, and he may also mention it. Nope, he didn't mention it in this post, but I'm sure he'll mention it in a future post, go into it in more detail. But if you're not familiar with date trunk, here it is. You get this function in Oracle, you get it in Postgres, and the whole idea is that I have a value and I have a date part. And so this is going to truncate the date to that part, which means it's not getting, what is the month of the year. It's saying, if I say date trunk to month, it's going to give me the beginning of the month. If I say date trunk to day, it's going to give me the beginning of the day. Date trunk to the ISO week gives me the European week. If I do date trunk week, we get the actual week. Had to rub that in a little bit. ISO weeks, if you're not too familiar with that, ISO weeks are a way of trying to...
Iceland? Oh.
Not Iceland weeks. There you go. ISO week. It's the International Standards Organization definition of a week, so that the first week of the year is always, it's like the first Monday of the year or something. So every once in a while you get 53 weeks. Yeah, finance uses it, but humans don't use it, just finance people.
Yeah, so I try to get us to stop using it, and because we're, as you guys know, like we're in a long conversion to SQL Server from Oracle, and we have create table from select, and we have trunk and tochar, and I'm like, use cast because we want to be ISO compliant so that this stuff runs in both. We have so much old code that has like trunk and to date and all this crap that's Oracle only.
As much as I love ragging on Oracle, I'm going to defend that practice. I may have defended it on air before, but let me do it right now. I do not mind. I'm going to take this
tweet about this.
I'm going to take this out of Oracle. I'm going to let's say focused database product.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to defend Oracle, but
formerly Sun Systems
defending Oracle.
That's libel and or slander, depending on whether I'm getting you for the tweet or whether I'm getting you for having said the tweet out loud.
You said it already. All I gotta do is point to the point in time on the video, and it'll be live, and proof.
So no, what I'm defending is not Oracle. What I'm defending is writing code specific for the data platform that you're using, because the data platform that you're using has specific optimizations, works in a certain way, has certain assumptions, and yes, there is ANSI SQL. Nobody implements ANSI SQL. Certain platforms get closer than others. Everybody's got their own special things. Yeah, Postgres does a really good job of having ANSI SQL. They do the closest, but they don't have everything, and they do a lot more than it. So focusing, like if you could only write ANSI SQL, I think you're losing a lot on every platform you're on, whether that be Oracle or SQL Server or DB2, Postgres, MySQL, whatever you want to choose, Hive, Spark, whatever. You're going to lose a lot of core functionality. And if you need to optimize your code, if you need to get the best performance out of a system, quite often that means moving away from what is strictly ANSI standard and incorporating things that are available within the product itself. And that can make it a pain when you are doing this translation. So, all the trunks and the to dates and all these other operations, that does make it painful for large scale conversion. So the 1% of cases where you do a large scale data platform conversion from one platform to a completely different one, boy, you're going to be in a lot of pain. But the 99% of the time when, that thing that was written in SQL Server is still in SQL Server 20 years later, or that thing written in Oracle is still in Oracle 20 years later, most of the time it doesn't matter. I mean, I would go so far as to say, I even agree with that sentiment in cases of software that is sold to customers and runs on a variety of platforms. That, I understand the siren song of, well, I can write this code that will work on all of these data platforms. Yes, it's going to work kind of poorly, and you're going to write really bad code, and it's not going to work. Like, it won't work in SQL Server very well because you make assumptions based on the fact that your developers are all Oracle developers. So they created a whole bunch of cursors. Because that worked fine in Oracle. But go ahead, Mike.
That's partly the problem I found also when I was researching some linting tools, is that many people write linters to work across multiple flavors of SQL. And it's like, okay, what this thing can do is so limited because it's supporting so many other things, not just this one thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've noticed that about some of the IntelliSense for SQL, but
someone even asked me if ScriptDOM can create syntax trees. Can they use it across Postgres and Oracle and all that? I'm like, no, it's a SQL Server. It's a SQL Server based thing, and it is very specifically for SQL Server only. It's not going to create abstract syntax trees on a bunch of other SQL stuff. Because the way SQL Server does it is very specific in a certain way. You can't have the same thing for, if you do, then it's going to be pretty limited.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just reading a little bit about C, and I think that and then I have to learn PL SQL. Sorry, because of something that's going on here.
But, I mean, you do have the book.
Yeah, somebody left it on my porch. I didn't even buy it. I swear to God. And then C is kind of like, you might. It seems like the intent of that is portability. Obviously, there's other more modern languages, but like you're making a VCR and you have an interface, and it has to work on other things. Whereas, leverage what you got. If you're in Oracle and there's forget the thing that they're off the top of my head, like offset fetch works in both, but because that's ANSI, but there's other things that you could use in Oracle, to your point, that would make you more productive. And that if you're doing one big conversion, the most critical things can be rewritten, and find and replace works fine. I mean, somebody's got to do the work, but
or regular expressions, or I had to say that to wake up Solomon.
They're good, and those are pretty good. And we use them a lot, and
this is a perfect case for regular expressions, and then making sure that your regular expression was a good one and doesn't get too greedy with like replacing a person's name because it has the word in, and you wanted to make in capitalized, the IN. Yeah, as long as you don't do something like that. Regular expressions can be really good across a code base. Good reason to have your code base in source control. Just saying.
We finally do that on religiously now, so that's good.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what's in CTP 2.1, at least for developers. So there are some nice things there. Another thing that I did notice that's in the new product is, I think it's as of CTP 2.1, Azure Active Directory authentication for on-premises SQL Server. So you do need to use Azure Arc. It has to be an Azure Arc enabled SQL Server installation. But if you do that, you can use Azure AD, including MFA, including multi-factor authentication. So if you have an Azure account and you want to allow people to connect to SQL Server on premises, and you want to ensure that they do the two-factor check before authenticating, that is now an option. So it's no longer just Windows authentication and SQL authentication. There is the possibility for most types of Azure AD auth. Not all of them. There's a couple that are not allowed, and they're along the lines of automated systems, managed identities, connecting, that kind of thing. And I don't know if that's going to be allowed in the future or if it's just that's a limitation. But if it's a human using Azure AD to connect to a SQL Server, as long as you're Azure Arc enabled, then you're good to go there. So that's kind of interesting. I would rate that somewhere between mildly interesting and fairly interesting. I don't know that it's going to have a whole lot of utilization, but I would say that for Azure VMs, I could see this being more popular. And the tooling has done a good job of integrating with Azure AD. It took them a couple of years to get it right. But if you're using Azure Data Studio or SSMS, that Azure AD integration is pretty easy at this point.
But don't use this as an excuse to get lazy on least privileged user.
That's true.
Don't just create one account and then, well, it's multi-factor, so whatever. It's only people in our company, but nope, you still don't want some of those people accessing some things.
No, because depending on the way in which multi-factor works, you may get prompted over and over and over on your phone. And this is a valid attack strategy, something that we saw in some attacks. Yeah. Like eventually, if I keep getting MFA request after request after request, fine, let me just approve it to get this thing to stop messaging me. A lot of people will do that. And
leave the app off my phone. Turn off notifications. That's what I do.
Yeah, so there's okay, fine, I'll just do this. Obviously something's messed up. Maybe my email is not working right. And then all of a sudden they've allowed an attacker in. Also enabling the Azure Arc extension for SQL Server, it's now an opt-in feature. This was one of the most controversial parts of CTP 2.0, which was that the Arc extension was installed by default. And you had to uncheck a box. And the way to see the box was you had to scroll down in the menu of items, which apparently a lot of people don't scroll down in the menu. And so they didn't see that this new thing was installed, and it had some requirements that a lot of people thought were onerous, were unnecessary. And now, if you want the Arc extension, it is a checkbox. You actively check the box on install, which is
there's a reason they put it at the bottom. They designed it that way, I'm sure.
Maybe so. You could be onto something there.
In me.
You could be onto something. That is a good way to increase utilization. And they also implemented bit manipulation functions, and if I see anybody use that in their code, I will revoke your access to the database.
Is this bitwise and ones like that?
This is left shift, right shift, bit count, get bit, set bit.
Those sound like fun to use.
So bitwise manipulation has been around for a couple decades in SQL Server, but these are new pieces of functionality. I actually don't know why they added them. I don't know which large customer of theirs demanded they add it, but don't be that customer.
You don't like them because of the security or performance or
No.
everything?
I mean, a bit of it is performance. Most of it is you're violating first normal form. If you need to do functions to, like, if you have a piece of data is a thing that you want to store on its own. If you constantly have to perform operations on that data to get the relevant information, that means you've stored it wrong. I can see bitwise operations for extremely high performance scenarios, where I need to have 500 rows and I'm going to enable like set bit flags based on which things are active and which things are not active, so using them as flags. But that kind of code is very painful and goes against relational database principles. If you're going to
covering
store
up
things,
garbage, it's not the right solution.
yeah, it's what you're ending up doing there is you're making life a lot more difficult, violating that concept of first normal form, and you're just doing a thing that relational databases aren't supposed to do. They can do it. There's a lot of stuff they can do, but it's the thing that you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
Then you write kind of complicated code that not everybody can read easily or understand.
That's a big part of it. Yes, it's
complicated. I've never
code.
seen that. Let me go look it up. I wonder what it's doing.
Yeah, or when you do the bitwise manipulations and somebody doesn't quite understand all the math involved in it and things get messed up, you have a flags table that's an integer and you have no way of understanding what does 97 mean. Oh, well, 97 means that you have flag 32, flag 64, and flag 1 enabled. Okay, what does that mean? Oh, well, if you look at this documentation that's on a notepad file on the lead developer's desktop, then clearly you'll know that 1 is this flag and 64 is this flag. Great, what's 32? I don't know. And that's the kind of problem that we tend to run into with another problem we run into with bitwise manipulation. You have no relational integrity. What do these flags represent? What happens if one of them is deprecated? What happens if we need to update them across the board for users? Can you solve the problem? Yes, but you're adding additional pain.
I know. I've recently hit something that maybe adds on to what you're saying. Is I create a lot of different types of objects based on other objects, and you get a level of complexity where if you create something that's kind of wonky, and then I go do something on top of that, like a view, or we do materialized view in Oracle World, but like there's lots of minutia of rules associated with them. Like you can't do correlated subqueries in a materialized view in Oracle.
Yep.
And if like so I'm like just trying to get through 30 materialized views, and I'm getting all these errors. Like one of the columns is too big now, and one of the columns is gone, and it's like So you just create complexity.
Materialized views. Oh my god.
Yeah, no, same thing with index views in SQL Server, where there are a lot of rules. There are a lot of cases when you're not going to need, or you're not going to be able to do a thing that you'd like to do. You can't use count. You must use count big. You can't use correlated subqueries, same as there. Left joins, I forget if you can do or not.
That's a big one.
I forget.
Well, we do merge, and I'm trying to get people out of the habit of merge. So I keep warning them, like, just so you know, there's a lot of bugs in the SQL Server merge that haven't been fixed.
Yep.
They're not like they're a little bit more. They're not as common, but like, let's just avoid them, please. We don't need them. Can do other design patterns.
Yes.
Trust these 97 blog posts and 77 discussions that have happened in the SQL Server world to just avoid it.
Hey, when 2008 came out, I was ecstatic about merge because I wanted upsert.
Yep.
I wanted the equivalent of upsert in SQL Server. They gave me sort of the equivalent of upsert, but this is like the meme where, the kid wants something and mom's like, well, we have that at home. And you go and see the thing at home is garbage. Merge is that thing at home. We have upsert at home.
They're like off-brand ho-hos. You're like, I want little Debbie's. They're like, oh, we've got little Wandas at home.
Right.
Oh, it's
exactly.
not the same.
Exactly. And in this case, it's not the same because this is the off-brand that is not good. Because you get the off-brand that is good. You get
Baker's
the Aldi
chocolate.
brand.
I stole Baker's chocolate once thinking it was chocolate. Oops. Kid brain. I had kid brain.
That's fair. So Solomon is defending the use of bitwise functions. So there is a place for them, even if it's very infrequent. I will agree. I do agree. There are places where bitwise can be useful. I also agree, very infrequent. I don't know that I've ever run into a case where it made sense. I've run into cases where people have used them, but I don't think I've ever hit a case where it really made sense. Nice to have the option, but they kind of already existed with bitwise or an and. So yes, these are syntactic sugar. These are ways of making bitwise manipulations easier, the new functions in SQL Server 2022. They don't add functionality to bitwise. They just, like you said, make it a little easier to use. Bitwise values don't need to be in the data. They can be used as parameter values to in a procedure to control behavior. Yeah, so as an alternative to doing something like sending in a JSON or XML block of options, I have 25 options where I want to use case sensitivity, yes or no. I want to I want to capitalize all the letters before running this, yes or no. I want to run this through this algorithm versus this algorithm. So you could think of it as, instead of having a separate a stored procedure parameter for everything, you sort of have your parms input and then process that parms input. So I can get that, especially when you have 90 input parameters. I can understand it. I wouldn't want to see it, but I could understand that.
So is it bitwise pre-formatting stuff in your procedure?
Not really. No, think of it more as you have a whole series of yes or no, on or off settings. And let's say I have 40 on or off settings. So I could have 40 bits that represent, is this thing on, is this thing off? Am I doing A, am I doing B? It's
I've
40.
never seen that kind of usage though, Kevin. Is it common?
Thankfully, no.
Yeah. I've never seen that anyway. I was looking at that thing and wondering, maybe it's an edge case, use case or something. Never seen it.
Is it something Solomon has to do for his SQL language that he did?
I mean, I can see something where you do have a whole lot of parameters.
We do,
and you've got to find a way to allow people to pass them in without changing the signature a whole lot. I mean, the benefit that I could see is you don't change the signature of the stored procedure by adding a new parameter. So if you have very procedure finicky input signatures, like your interface is not allowed to change ever, then okay, I could see that. That's another similar case for using XML as an input or using JSON as an input. And the benefit to this would be, if you send XML or JSON, there's a lot of text potentially that you're passing to the database versus bitwise, where it's just a 40 bytes instead of a kilobyte. it's still, I mean, if I were to see something like that, I would say, oh, I would really want to see that well documented. Collations have an ID. That ID is a bitmask value based on the version. It's case sensitive, accent sensitive, locale, culture, etc. Yes, the system does have bitwise values embedded in it, and so I'm not railing against bitwise values as such. I'm railing against them in business scenarios. And so if, for example, we were talking about, hey, I need to write this C code and I need to set a bunch of flags. Using like passing a bitwise flag set, using bitwise manipulation, that's a pattern. It's a thing that people do, and it makes sense, especially if you're extremely memory constrained. So, yeah, there's good uses for that type of flag number, flag integer, flag big int, flag arbitrary byte length, and being able to handle 8 times as many parameters or actually many more than 8 times as many parameters, probably. For working with relational databases, if it's already in there, I know also SQL Agent does some bitwise operations for the math that they do, but I would not want to see people adding new code using, like, I've got a new table. I've got a table here that's a binary and using a lot of bitwise manipulation to set flags. I've seen that before, and I think that's right out. If you're saying I need to work with collations and collations are done this way in SQL Server, okay, you know what? I get that. That's the way things are. It's more of I would not want people creating this anew. I would not want people creating, like, here's a mess of bit flags with no documentation, because there's never documentation, or it's never correct, and just throwing it out at the rest of a team. That's where my sharp dislike of bitwise manipulation of SQL Server is, and it does come from a couple of scenarios where I have used it, and the things have been really poorly documented, and finding bugs in the bitwise operations is always really fun. Collation IDs are not something that people ever deal with, and it's don't even think it's advertised that the IDs have an actual meaning. That's quite possible. I did not know that they had an actual meaning. So
yeah, that's a great trivia thing to know.
But yeah, so I mean, I could see if you had a bunch of yes/no parameters and you needed a really efficient way to pass it, because this thing's getting called hundreds of thousands of times an hour, and so you can't use JSON or XML. Ooh. That thing better be documented really well. Otherwise, that's a real pain point. And storing the data in binary.
How did you figure this out, Solomon? I'm just curious. How did you figure out that the ID had some meaning?
That's a good question. I wonder if it's actually in documentation somewhere. That it's I'm guessing that it's in some spec document that's on Microsoft's site at some point. You can see the collation ID in log files. It's used in the TDS, but most people won't get there.
So, like, they get something from the ID itself, parse the ID and get something from it, I guess.
Yeah, sounds like Microsoft does that. They do that within the bowels of SQL Server,
right?
And so maybe they added these functions so that they can do something with it. But
tabular data stream.
Yes, the tabular data stream, that's basically, think of that as the protocol that's used to send data from a SQL Server to a client.
Oh yeah, we call it the call interface in Oracle.
Maybe. I mean, this is the actual protocol, so it's a agreed upon way of communication, like TCP.
Gotcha.
And TDS is your way of communicating over TCP to send data, and to send requests to get data. Figured it out
Feels
years
like
ago,
they
so
are
I
like
don't.
a Dan Brown novel or something. That the idea itself has me.
Yep. So Solomon says, I figured it out years ago, so I don't remember exactly how, but I assume they did it based on how they did some other thing, tested it, found out that it was true. That's fair. That's a way to do it. I have the bit ranges mapped out, just need to write it all up. Then there will be one blog post on the internet about it. So that is interesting. That's definitely something I did not know.
Then we'll all be a bit wiser.
Where's the ban button? I'm gonna kick Mike out right now.
Go kick me out for
Solomon, do you want to replace Mike? All right. So speaking of Mike, you've been working with Azure Data Factory.
Yeah, tangentially. So yeah, this is not a criticism of it. It's more like I think we've kind of.
It's okay. We can criticize Azure Data Factory here.
Yeah. Well, so I was going back through some of the things that have come up, and it kind of gets into a shop talky, like we kind of feel like we're doing free development for them because we're finding a lot of bugs and we're having challenges getting feedback. They're listening and doing some stuff, but so essentially we have this Fire. We're trying to use Fire, and then we were using Happy Fire, and then we kind of decided to go with the Azure Data Factory to kind of process records, de-identify them, and then serve them up, so clients can like pull them into like a Tableau like tool. So we have like big limitations and then like small ones. So there's like small things where like the command line will differ from the portal values. So essentially you'll be like, is snapshot isolation on? Yes. You go to the command line and say, is it on? It's like, no, it's not on. And it's like, it blows your mind. You're like, how is this possible? So there's little like quirky things like that make troubleshooting hard. We had an issue with using JSON schemas. So essentially when it's the JSON detector is kind of looking for records, any null records it rejects. It doesn't accept any null values. Which seemed like kind of unfathomable for our lead developer. He was just like, I can't believe a product like this would have that kind of behavior.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's probably a way to do it, that there's just some setting that needs to be set. But I would also say that sounds like a great product. I mean, it gets rid of the biggest problem in software development history. Maybe the second biggest problem after pointers.
Then, like by default, batch tasks are on a single node, and so that was like creating a serious issue for us. And so he was able to create a workaround to create sets of batches that went across nodes, but it was not easy and it was not documented, so it was kind of a workaround.
Batches of batches.
It can't de-identify very fast. We only have, this is kind of a proof of concept, so it's kind of pitched as this Fire product can do de-identification on the fly, and it really can't. It's very, very, very slow. We have 5,000 patient records, and it chokes. So we have more we need to throw at it. So the specific issue, the specific project we're working on is like COVID patients that have opted into these studies. It's all de-identified, but then we want to put in patients that tested and patients that tested positive. So that's a lot of patients. That's going to be 100,000 patients, and tested patients is going to be 80% of the whole base of population. So we can't get it. It will take weeks to do this stuff. Like it won't work.
Yeah, no. So Tom Norman talked about building QA environments and kind of de-identifying or obfuscating customer data as you move to a QA environment.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what the nature of the de-identification is, I guess some levels of de-identification can be really difficult. Like, obviously, name is easy; just don't include a name. But if you're talking, zip codes and specific customer characteristics, patient characteristics, where how many left-handed people of this small religious group live in this zip code and have tested positive for something and for this particular thing in the past,
Right.
you could probably get that down to, there's George, and now we know George, even though you haven't given the name George. I can understand that as a difficulty in de-identification, but for a lot of other things, it's like if just don't include demographic details. Question mark?
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing was there was a limit of fire objects of 4 megabytes. So the list of de-identified fire objects is so large it blows away the $4 million limit. So he's doing another workaround for that. So I think he's looking at right now. I think they're looking at like Cosmos DB and MongoDB use cases, depending on what they're trying to do, and some kind of variation on Parquet files. I think
By the way,
part of
for people who don't understand what Mike is saying by fire, FHIR. So I just dropped a link in here for the service. But go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. So essentially, it's been, I guess, it's been headache after headache after headache when they thought that the kind of tools would be able to work at scale, and it's been a real challenge. Now that said, there are other. I lost there. That said, other tools are having the same problem. So like we had the same problem with HappyFire, which is Java, and then there was another one with AWS, and then there was one other. So we're having challenges with it in general. But it's been interesting to hear some of the feedback from the ADF. But Microsoft folks are helping. It's just, it felt like there's been doing a lot of bug hunting for them, and it felt to him, this is not my words, and I wouldn't put words in his mouth, but he's just been shocked that it hasn't been able to do a lot of the things that we needed it to do and what it's been built to do.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Especially this is a a niche. Yeah, it is a niche. It's an industry niche. Healthcare is a big niche. But yeah, this is an area where I think some of these products are pretty new, especially for official Microsoft support, that you're talking about a couple years ago at most. Yeah, like the Fire Converter released to open source March 6th of 2020, and the new version, the Liquid template, was November 13th of 2020. So you're talking about things that Microsoft's really been publicly supporting for about a year to a year and a half. And I know that they've made some big pushes in specific areas in health. That health has been a big part of like a industry-wide push for them.
Right.
Even so, this is large. I'm guessing that you're translating Epic records into the format for them. Is that what's happening?
Exactly. Yeah, we're taking kind of like a query that I ran, and then it gets dropped into Azure, picked up into a data pipeline, gets de-identified, and mapped and demapped.
Yeah, and
and then put on a front end.
if I were taking a wild guess, I would assume that the mapping and demapping is probably a very expensive process.
Yes.
Like essentially you're translating a Epic-based EHR, electronic health record, to a Fire-based electronic health record, the HL7 type, and these records I'm also guessing are pretty large. I'm not guessing they are pretty large. So, not making excuses there, trying to understand the why behind it. But yeah, that sounds like a lot of pain.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm not so there's a lead person that's like, he is like a genius, like, like Google, what is that? Google Genius Award winner. He kind of like invented some stuff. And then there's like a software architect, and they work hand in hand. They do a really good job. So it's neat. It's a good experience to kind of sit in some of the stuff, and I help with the, data ditch digging, I say, but it's been good to learn a lot. But it's not an easy problem to solve.
Right. Right. No, it sounds like it, considering that several different products have all struggled. So, that's a shame. That is a shame. Sounds like
Hopefully it
custom code
matures.
time.
It sounds like they're very responsive. So it sounds like they were, but he's doing some new analysis, because I think he did a whole bunch of pull requests, and companies don't move that fast, right? We're just trying to get the thing done, right?
Right. Yep. So it's time to write some custom code.
Yeah.
If we learn anything tonight, use bitwise operators. Or not. I'm not your real dad. So on that note, I think we're gonna call it for the evening. We're a couple of minutes early, but I did run out of things on here, and Mala had to run. So let's call it. Remember the 3 user group meetings for the month of August. Advanced DBA next Tuesday. Main meeting 3rd Tuesday, and the data science and business intelligence 4th Tuesday. I believe that all 3 of those are already up on our meetup site, thanks to Tracy. And
Correct.
so next Tuesday, we've got Torsten Strauss, who's going to talk to us about page latches. The 3rd Tuesday for our main meeting, Jared Poche will talk about micro optimization, millisecond-wise optimization. And the 4th Tuesday, Armando Lacerda will talk to us about the lake house. So it'll be good to see Armando
Nice.
again.
Lake house.
Yes.
Let's go to the lake.
Yeah. I would
lake
recommend
house.
lake houses in the upper Midwest. Those are pretty good. But with
Love
that, we're going to call it for the evening. So thank you, everyone. And until we see you again, take care.
Night.